What the hell is that eyesore on your roof? And don't you dare tell me it's necessary. I don't care what your job is. That cable, that antenna, that entire mess you've created is a violation.
Look.
And I will not have this neighborhood turn into some kind of tech jungle because you think rules don't apply to you.
That's not fair.
Was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. I learned the hard way that there are two things you never mess with in a quiet American neighborhood: another person's property and anything that even smells like federal infrastructure. I didn't know that yet, of course. Back then, I thought the worst thing that could happen on my block was another passive-aggressive note about trash cans left out 17 minutes too long, or lawn height exceeding the mandated 2 3/4 inches. You know, the usual suburban theater of control disguised as civility. I was wrong. So spectacularly, catastrophically wrong that for one very long day, my driveway turned into a parking lot for government sedans with plates I couldn't quite read, and my nosy HOA president, clipboard in hand, confidence fully intact, learned what it feels like when the clipboard stops protecting you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Let me tell you how we got here. When I bought my house, it wasn't much to look at. A narrow 2-story on Alder Ridge Lane with creaky porch steps that groaned every time you put weight on them, paint that had seen better decades, maybe better centuries, and a stubborn old sycamore tree out front that dropped leaves like it was personally offended by the concept of autumn. I loved it anyway. It was mine, quiet, affordable, and most importantly, it came with access to a newly installed fiber optic line that ran clean and fast straight through our back alley. That last part, that mattered more than anyone around me realized. I worked remotely as a systems analyst for a large aerospace subcontractor. Nothing sexy, no James Bond nonsense, no shadowy meetings in parking garages, mostly just long, grueling days staring at lines of code, monitoring system performance, running diagnostics, making absolutely certain that nothing that shouldn't blink ever blinked. It was boring, high-responsibility work, the kind where latency isn't just annoying, it's a problem. The kind where a dropped connection doesn't mean you reload a web page, it means you potentially compromise a project with a budget that could fund a small nation. So I invested in my setup. I ran clean conduit from the utility pole to my garage, installed a tidy patch panel, labeled every single cable like a paranoid librarian with OCD, and bought a modem that could handle ridiculous data loads without breaking a sweat. The whole setup was quiet, invisible, professional. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd never even notice it. Unfortunately, someone did. Her name wasn't actually Karen, obviously, but if the shoe fits, you wear it, and brother, this shoe was a perfect fit. I'll call her Linda. Linda lived 3 houses down. Corner lot, immaculate lawn that looked like it was trimmed with surgical scissors, decorative flags that changed with the seasons, sometimes with the weeks, and a presence that somehow managed to fill the entire street without her ever raising her voice above a certain, precisely calibrated volume. She was the HOA president, which in our neighborhood meant she had a clipboard, a neighborhood app account with admin privileges, and a deep, almost spiritual belief that order was fragile, civilization was teetering, and only she, Saint Linda of the cul-de-sac, was holding it all together. She noticed everything. Trash cans rolled out 15 minutes too early, a fence post leaning half an inch off vertical, a wind chime that made noise after the mandated 8 p.m. quiet hour. She didn't yell, she didn't confront, she documented. She smiled, she filed, she sent polite messages with smiley faces that somehow felt like legal summons. And then, one day, she noticed my roof. Not the house itself, just the little antenna that poked up near the back ridge like a shy metal finger. It wasn't even flashy, just part of my internal network, barely visible unless you were actively looking for something to complain about. The first message came through the app that night. Friendly reminder that rooftop installations require HOA approval per Section 7.3.2 of the Community Guidelines. I replied politely, explained it wasn't visible from the street, wasn't an installation in the traditional sense, wasn't even new. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji that somehow felt like a threat. From that point on, she hovered, like a drone with a clipboard. She asked about cables she didn't understand, complained about utility workers who weren't even there for me, once accused me of installing a satellite dish I didn't own, didn't want, and wouldn't have been able to see from her house even if I had installed it. Each interaction was cordial on the surface, but there was an edge underneath, like she'd decided I was a problem that just hadn't revealed its violation yet, like I was a code error she hadn't found the right syntax to flag. Then came the Monday morning when everything went quiet. I got home from a short grocery run, milk, eggs, the usual, and felt it immediately, that wrong kind of silence. You know the one? When your house is supposed to hum with the soft background noise of modern life, and instead it's just empty. No doorbell chime when I walked in, no soft hum from the refrigerator compressor, no little notification ping from my phone syncing with the house network. I checked the router first. Dark. Modem? Dead. My phone refused to load even a single web page, just spun that little loading circle like it was mocking me. At first, I assumed an outage. It happens, right? Storms, construction, squirrels with a death wish chewing through cables. So I grabbed a hoodie and walked around back to the alley where the junction box sat. The sky was clear, no storm damage, no fallen branches. Everything looked normal, until it didn't. The line running from the utility pole down to my ground box was gone. Not frayed, not torn by wind or weather, cleanly cut, surgical, like someone had taken their time, used the right tool, and made absolutely certain it wouldn't reconnect by accident. My stomach dropped. That cold, sinking feeling when you realize something has gone very, very wrong, and you're about to find out exactly how wrong. I called the provider. They confirmed the neighborhood was fine. No outages, no maintenance, just me. They promised a crew in the morning and offered a temporary hotspot that barely loaded email. I thanked them, hung up, and stood there staring at the severed cable like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. That's when I heard footsteps on the porch. Linda stood there, posture perfect, hair pulled back in that tight, controlled way she always wore it, eyes sharp, assessing. She looked past me at the cut cable and made a little noise of disapproval, the kind of sound you make when you see a stain on a carpet. "You should really be more careful about how your wires run. It looks messy." "Did you cut my cable?" I asked. She smiled, just slightly. The corners of her mouth ticked up in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "I wouldn't touch private property," she said calmly. "I found it like that this morning during my walk. I've already reported it to the HOA and the Utilities Committee." And that's when I realized this wasn't just a broken internet line anymore. This was a line someone shouldn't have crossed, and she'd crossed it with bolt cutters and a smile. I stood there for a long moment after she left, just listening to the porch boards settle back into place, trying to decide whether I was angry or just stunned. Because there's a special kind of whiplash that comes from realizing a neighbor might have crossed from annoying to genuinely unhinged while smiling at you the whole time. I didn't chase her, didn't argue, didn't even say anything clever. I just took photos, lots of them. Close-ups of the cut, wide shots of the alley, timestamps enabled, different angles, the kind of documentation you learn to collect when your job trains you to assume everything will someday be reviewed by someone who doesn't know you, doesn't like you, and doesn't care how reasonable you sound. Then I opened the neighborhood app. I posted a short, factual message. Nothing accusatory, nothing emotional, just my service line was deliberately cut sometime last night. Provider has been notified. Repairs scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tampering with utility equipment is a serious legal issue. If anyone has camera footage or saw anything unusual, please reach out. I hit post and put the phone down, because I already knew how that app worked. Once you light the fuse, you don't control where the sparks land. Within minutes, the reply started rolling in. Some neighbors were angry on my behalf. Others immediately jumped to theories about vandals, bored teenagers, kids these days. One guy, bless him, offered to loan me a generator like we were preparing for a siege. And then there were the quiet ones, the people who didn't comment but viewed the post twice, 3 times, the ones who knew exactly who had a history of finding problems in other people's yards. Linda responded about 20 minutes later. She wrote that she had reported the damage to the HOA board, that unsightly wiring had been an ongoing concern, and that everyone should remain calm until the provider resolved the issue. It was written in that same polished, passive-aggressive tone she used for everything. Calm, official, just vague enough to sound helpful without actually saying anything useful. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. The subtext was already screaming. The next morning, the provider's truck pulled up just after 8 a.m. The technician was a guy named Mark, mid-40s, sunburned neck, coffee thermos that had clearly lived a full and complicated life. He didn't even need a ladder. One look at the severed line and he let out a low whistle. "That's clean. Real clean." "Accidental?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He shook his head slowly. "Nope, that's a tool cut. Someone wanted it dead." He took photos, ran tests on both ends of the line, and then he paused, longer than I expected, scrolling through something on his tablet. He glanced up at me, and his expression had changed. More careful, more curious. "What do you do for work?" he asked casually. I hesitated for half a beat. Then I told him the truth. Broad strokes, nothing classified, just enough. He nodded slowly, like a piece of a puzzle had just clicked into place. "That explains why this trip to upstream alarms." I blinked. "Upstream alarms?" Mark said it matter-of-factly. "Your line routes through a shared commercial exchange. Normally, a residential cut wouldn't raise eyebrows, but your circuit? It's flagged as priority traffic. When it went dark, it didn't just disappear quietly." I felt that cold, sinking sensation again, the one that tells you something small is about to become something much, much bigger than you planned for. Mark made a call, then another. He stepped a little farther away, voice low, professional. I caught fragments. Confirmed deliberate severance, priority flagged, requesting escalation. When he came back, his entire demeanor had changed. Straighter posture, less small talk, more protocol. "They're expediting the repair," he said carefully, "but there's going to be some questions. Federal questions." I didn't even have time to process what that meant before the first black sedan rolled onto the street. Then another. Then another. They parked neatly, deliberately, like they'd rehearsed it. Doors opened in unison. People stepped out. Men and women in dark suits, earpieces, expressions that gave away absolutely nothing. Not flashy, not aggressive, just unmistakably official. My neighbors noticed immediately. Garage doors froze halfway open. A kid on a bike stopped pedaling mid-street. Curtains shifted in windows up and down the block. And Linda? Linda appeared at the edge of her driveway with a clipboard in hand, like it was muscle memory she couldn't override even in a crisis. One of the agents approached me first. Polite smile, calm voice, asked for my name and ID. Another spoke quietly with Mark, taking notes. A third walked the alley, photographing the cut cable and the surrounding area with the kind of thoroughness that made it clear this wasn't just routine. Everything was methodical, almost boring in its efficiency, which somehow made it more unsettling. Linda drifted closer, unable to resist. She announced herself before anyone even asked. "I'm the HOA president. Is there a problem here?" One of the agents turned to her, smiled professionally, asked a few routine questions in that tone that sounds friendly but isn't. Had she noticed anything unusual? When had she first seen the damage? Had she reported it to anyone else? Her answers came quick, too quick, clean, rehearsed. She said she'd discovered the cut early that morning during her routine walk, said she'd immediately documented it for HOA records, said she had no idea how it happened but was very concerned about neighborhood safety. I watched her while she spoke, not with anger, not yet, but with a kind of detached curiosity, because when you spend your career watching systems fail, you learn to recognize patterns, and her story had the same feeling as a log file that's been edited just a little too carefully. The agent nodded, thanked her, and then said something that changed the air on the entire street. "Ma'am, because this line was associated with critical communications infrastructure, we need to determine whether the damage was accidental or intentional. If it was intentional, there are federal statutes that apply. Title 18, Section 1362, Destruction of Communication Lines. It's not a small matter." Linda's smile tightened, just slightly, but I saw it, that flicker. Not fear exactly, recalculation. They asked me next, where I'd been the night before, who had access to my property, any ongoing disputes with neighbors. I answered honestly, carefully. I handed over my photos, my timestamps, the post history from the app. One of the agents thanked me and said I'd done exactly what they would have recommended. Meanwhile, Mark and the repair crew kept running tests. Every result pointed in the same direction. Deliberate, targeted, no collateral damage, professional-grade cut. Not vandalism, not accidental. About half an hour later, another vehicle arrived. Less subtle this time. Government plates. A uniformed liaison stepped out, introduced himself with a handshake and a name that immediately fell out of my head because my brain was too busy processing the fact that my internet outage had officially become a federal matter. We're not here to alarm anyone, but when certain commercial handoffs go down unexpectedly, protocol requires a full investigation, especially when the circuit is tied to defense-adjacent work. Linda wasn't hovering anymore. She'd retreated to her driveway, arms crossed, clipboard hanging uselessly at her side. And that's when everything shifted. A neighbor I'd barely spoken to before, quiet guy named Tom who lived across the alley, approached one of the agents. He was holding his phone like it might explode. I think I might have something." Turns out, Tom had a security camera pointed at his garage. Motion activated, nothing fancy, budget model from a big box store. But he'd been reviewing the footage after seeing my post on the app. "Just curious," he said. "Just wanted to see if he'd caught anything." At 2:12 a.m., his camera had picked up movement near the utility pole. A figure, walking slowly, stopping, bending down near the junction box, standing back up again. The image wasn't perfect, grainy night mode footage, low resolution, but the posture was unmistakable. The walk, the hair pulled back, the clipboard tucked under one arm. Even in the dark, even pixelated, it was her, Linda. A long pause. The agents asked Tom to send them the footage immediately. He did. They reviewed it on a tablet right there in the street, rewinding, zooming, cross-referencing timestamps. Then they asked Linda to step aside for a moment, politely, but firmly. She tried to maintain composure, tried to insist there must be some mistake, some misunderstanding, but her story began to shift under the weight of timestamps and metadata and call logs that didn't lie. Small inconsistencies at first, a different time mentioned, a misremembered detail, then larger cracks. Why had she been outside at that hour? Why hadn't she mentioned it earlier when they'd asked? Why did the footage show her standing at the exact location of the cut for nearly 4 minutes? The agents were polite, professional, but relentless. Statements were taken. The severed cable was bagged and tagged like evidence from a crime scene, which technically it was. The street, which had been buzzing with nervous energy an hour earlier, fell into a hush that felt heavy, consequential. By noon, the repair was complete. My connection came back online. Clean, fast, like nothing had ever happened. The agents gave me instructions before they left. Keep my logs, forward any documentation from my employer about the impact of the outage. The explained possible outcomes, administrative fines, restitution, potential criminal charges if intent was proven. Then they left. Just like that. The sedans rolled away, the street slowly exhaled, and Linda stood there, very still, watching her authority evaporate in real time. After the cars left and the street started breathing again, something subtle shifted. Not just around me, in the way people looked at each other. Like everyone had collectively realized that the invisible lines we all pretend don't matter, they actually matter. A lot. Garage doors finished opening. A lawnmower started up somewhere down the block. Kids drifted back onto the sidewalk like deer testing a clearing after a loud noise. Life resumed. But it didn't feel the same. Linda stayed where she was for a long moment, arms folded tight across her chest, staring at the spot where the last sedan had disappeared. The clipboard dangled from her hand like it had finally run out of purpose. No one approached her. No one defended her. That silence was louder than anything anyone could have said. By that evening, the neighborhood app was on fire. Screenshots of earlier posts resurfaced. People quoted Linda's own comments back at her, the ones about unsightly wiring and community standards and maintaining property values. Others admitted, a little sheepishly, that they'd seen her out late before, that she'd always claimed she was checking compliance or following up on reports, that they'd thought it was weird but hadn't wanted to make waves. A few tried to calm things down, reminded everyone that no charges had been filed yet, that due process mattered, that we shouldn't rush to judgment. But the tone had shifted. The mystique was gone. Power only works as long as people believe in it. And nobody believed anymore. The HOA board called an emergency meeting 2 days later. Not the usual quarterly gathering with stale cookies and passive-aggressive complaints about fence colors, a real one. Closed door at first, then open once word spread and people demanded transparency. I didn't plan to attend. I really didn't. I'd said my piece, given my statement, done my part. But curiosity has a way of winning when you've been unwillingly cast in the center of something like this. Linda sat at the head of the table when I walked in, posture rigid, jaw clenched. The rest of the board, 5 other people, all looking deeply uncomfortable, avoided eye contact with her. There was a stack of papers in front of them, printed screenshots, timelines, the provider's incident report, and a brief formal letter on federal letterhead acknowledging an ongoing inquiry. No drama, no theatrics, just facts. Linda spoke first. Of course she did. She said she'd only meant to enforce the rules, that the neighborhood had been slipping, that standards mattered, that she never intended for things to escalate, never imagined her actions would trigger something so serious. She avoided the word cut entirely, danced around it like language itself might indict her. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. I explained what that connection meant to my livelihood, how it wasn't decorative, how it wasn't optional, how I'd tried, repeatedly, to address her concerns calmly and reasonably. I talked about trust, about property, about the difference between governance and control. Someone asked Linda directly if she'd touched the cable. She didn't answer right away. That pause did more damage than any confession could have. A long silence. The board voted before the meeting ended. Unanimous. She was removed as HOA president effective immediately, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. No shouting, no drama. just a quiet acknowledgement that whatever she'd thought she was protecting, she'd gone too far. She walked out without looking at anyone. Later that night, I was back in my garage, plugging in a new surge protector, organizing cables, listening to the soft, reassuring hum of systems coming back online. The modem lights blinked, green, steady, healthy, data flowing, life resuming. Across the street, Linda stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, staring at my house like it was an unsolved equation, a problem she couldn't fix. For a second, I considered staying inside, letting things end there, clean, final. But something in me wanted closure, or maybe just clarity. I grabbed 2 coffees and walked over. "Do you want to explain?" I asked quietly, holding one out. She looked at the cup like it was a trap. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, in a voice much smaller than I'd ever heard from her, "I was just trying to keep order. People don't realize how quickly neighborhoods fall apart, how fast things can go wrong if no one's paying attention." "Order isn't the same as control," I said, "and it definitely doesn't include cutting someone's property." She didn't argue, didn't deny it, just looked down at the sidewalk like it had betrayed her. "They won't arrest me, will they?" she asked, almost to herself. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's not up to me." She nodded once, like she'd expected that answer. We stood there for another minute, not talking, just 2 people on opposite sides of a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Then she turned and walked back to her house. I never saw the clipboard again. So, I'll leave you with this. Was Linda a villain, or just someone who mistook control for responsibility? Did the response fit the crime, or did the system overreact to a neighborhood dispute that should have been settled with a conversation and an apology? And where exactly do we draw the line between community standards and personal boundaries? I'm genuinely curious what you think, because somewhere out there, right now, someone else is staring at a line they think they're entitled to cross. Someone with a clipboard, or a complaint, or just a burning need to fix what they think is broken. And they might need to hear this story before they do. Because once you cut the wrong cable, you don't get to choose what shows up at your door. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, respect boundaries, and remember, not all wires are just wires. Some of them are connected to things much bigger than you think.